A human fist smashed into the airlock control panel with bone-shattering force, sending crystalline shards of alien metal slicing through Alexander Morales' skin. Blood droplets drifted lazily in the zero-G environment as the Retribution's lights flickered to life and klaxons began to blare. It had been 500,000 years since the Galactic Council destroyed Earth, and now, in humanity's darkest hour, the secret human fleet was finally activating for its long-awaited vengeance. As feeling returned to his cryogenically frozen muscles, Alex pushed himself out of the stasis pod. He floated down the dimly lit corridor, heart pounding, towards the bridge of the Retribution. "Status report," he barked as he pulled himself onto the command deck. "All systems online, sir," replied a grizzled veteran hunched over a glowing control panel. "But there's something you need to see." Alex's eyes widened as he took in the holographic star map dominating the bridge. In the 500 millennia since the survivors of Earth's destruction began secretly building this fleet, the ruthless Rizian aliens had conquered half the galaxy. Trillions of sentient beings across millions of worlds now languished under the boot of Rizian oppression. "Those Rizian bastards," Alex spat. "When I get my hands on them—" "Sir, our first target is locked," an officer called out. "A critical Rizian military installation. If we can take it out, their empire will be vulnerable." Alex clenched his fists, barely registering the pain of his sliced knuckles. This was it. Humanity's big chance. If this secret strike succeeded, it would pave the way for the resurgence of the human species. But if it failed— Alex swallowed hard. Failure meant the total annihilation of the human race once and for all. No pressure. As he strapped into the command chair and grabbed the controls, Alex thought of his ancestors, the brave men and women who escaped Earth and had the foresight to begin this audacious plan. 500,000 years later, victory or extinction lay in his hands. "This is for Earth," Alex growled as he activated the fleet's powerful Alcubierre drives. "Time to show these Rizian scumbags what humans are made of." With a crackle of energy and a flash of light, the human fleet jumped towards Rizian space, ready to unleash retribution 500,000 years in the making. Alex vowed to himself that this time, the Rizians would be the ones facing annihilation, and humanity would rise from the ashes to take back the stars that were rightfully theirs, no matter the cost. The Retribution dropped out of Alcubierre space at the edge of the Zephyrus system. Alexander Morales stood on the bridge, his eyes fixed on the holographic display of the planet and the heavily fortified Rizian base below. "Stealth systems engaged," the pilot reported. "We're running silent." Alexander nodded. The success of their mission hinged on catching the Rizians off guard. As the Retribution slipped into orbit, Alexander headed to the armory where his strike team was gearing up. He grabbed a pulse rifle and checked the charge. "Listen up," he barked. "We've got one shot at this. Get in, hit them hard, and get out." The team boarded the dropship, adrenaline pumping through their veins as they streaked toward the surface. Alexander gripped his rifle tightly, preparing himself for the battle ahead. The dropship landed in a secluded canyon a few clicks from the base. Alexander and his team moved out, their advanced stealth suits rendering them nearly invisible against the rocky terrain. They approached the base perimeter, hugging the shadows. Alexander signaled to the team to split up. He locked eyes with Sergeant Hawkins. "Plant those charges, give 'em hell." Hawkins flashed a predatory grin. "With pleasure, sir." Alexander crept towards the main complex, his suit's sensor suite guiding him past patrolling Rizian guards. He reached the control room and sliced through the door with a plasma torch. Inside, Rizian technicians scrambled for their weapons, but Alexander cut them down with precise shots. He jacked into the main console and began uploading the virus. As the progress bar ticked upward, Alexander dug deeper into the system. What he found made his blood run cold. This base was no mere military outpost. It was a research station developing a superweapon capable of annihilating entire star systems. Alexander's fingers flew over the controls, copying the weapon schematics. Just as the download completed, alarms began to sound. A Rizian technician slumped over a console, his dying act alerting the base to the intrusion. "Shit!" Alexander hissed. He opened the comms. "Hawkins, we're blown. Detonate the charges." Confirmations crackled over the link as Alexander sprinted for the research labs. Explosions rocked the base, the tremors nearly knocking Alexander off his feet. Ahead, Rizian troops poured into the corridors. Alexander charged forward, rifle spitting plasma. Rizian after Rizian fell, their charred corpses littering the floor. Alexander burst into the lab, snatching up a data drive loaded with the superweapon plans. More explosions tore through the base as Alexander raced for the evac point. The complex was coming apart, gouts of flame billowing from shattered windows. Alexander leapt through a shattered wall, narrowly avoiding a tumbling girder. The evac shuttle screamed overhead, its hatch yawning open. Alexander jumped, catching the edge and hauling himself aboard. As the shuttle clawed for the stars, Alexander slumped against the bulkhead, clutching the precious data drive. Around him, his battered team celebrated their victory, but the fight was not nearly finished. Back on the Retribution, Alexander limped to his quarters. He plugged the data drive into his console and pored over the schematics, his mind racing. These plans could turn the tide of the war, but if the Rizians completed the superweapon first... Alexander gritted his teeth. He would not let that happen. The Rizians had taken everything from him, his homeworld, his family, his future. Now it was humanity's turn to strike back. He opened a comlink to the bridge. "Get me Zephyr Actual." It was time to plan their next move. With the superweapon data and the Rizian base in ruins, the human resistance finally had the upper hand. Alexander allowed himself a small smile. The Rizians had ruled the galaxy for 500,000 years, but they were about to learn that humanity would not go quietly into the night. Retribution was coming, and it would shake the stars. Alexander Morales stood on the bridge of the Retribution, his eyes fixed on the holographic display of Rizia Prime. The stolen superweapon plans flashed through his mind, fueling his commitment. "We hit them where it hurts," he announced to his crew. "Zephyrus was just the beginning. Now we take the fight to their homeworld." Sergeant Hawkins stepped forward, her face set in a grim smile. "What's the plan, sir?" Alexander tapped the display, zooming in on a heavily fortified section of the planet. "This is our target, a top-secret research facility where they're developing the superweapon. We take it out. We cripple their war machine." Private Novak, hunched over a console nearby, piped up. "Sir, I've analyzed the stolen Rizian codes. We can use them to slip past their defense grid undetected." "Good work, Novak," Alexander nodded. "Get us in close. We'll deploy under cover of darkness." Hours later, Alexander led his strike team into the belly of a stealth shuttle. The air was thick with tension as they strapped in, checking weapons and equipment one last time. "Remember," Alexander said, his voice low and intense, "we're not just fighting for ourselves. We're fighting for Earth, for everyone the Rizians have enslaved or killed. Failure is not an option." The shuttle doors hissed open, revealing the dense jungle of Rizia Prime. Alexander and his team moved out, their stealth suits blending seamlessly with the shadows. They hadn't gone far when Alexander held up a fist, signaling a halt. Ahead, a Rizian patrol moved through the underbrush, their elongated forms barely visible in the gloom. Alexander signaled to Hawkins, who nodded and took aim with her sniper rifle. 2 silenced shots rang out, and the Rizians dropped without a sound. As they pushed deeper into the jungle, disabling sensor arrays and eliminating patrols, the research facility came into view. A shimmering energy shield enveloped it, pulsing with an eerie blue light. "Novak," Alexander whispered, "find us a way in." The tech specialist's fingers flew over his portable terminal. "Got it," he said after a tense minute. "There's a weak point in the shield generator. If we can take it out, the whole thing comes down." Alexander nodded grimly. "Lead the way." They found the generator guarded by a squad of elite Rizian soldiers. Alexander didn't hesitate. He charged forward, his team at his heels. The air filled with plasma fire as they engaged the guards. Alexander ducked and weaved, his enhanced reflexes allowing him to dodge the deadly bolts. He closed in on a Rizian, driving his fist into its elongated skull with bone-crushing force. Hawkins provided covering fire as Novak planted the explosives. "Clear!" he yelled. They sprinted for cover as the charges detonated. The generator exploded in a shower of sparks and twisted metal, and the shield flickered and died. Inside the facility, alarms blared as Alexander and his team fought their way through waves of panicked scientists and security forces. They reached the central control room, securing it in a hail of gunfire. As Novak hacked into the facility's systems, Alexander's blood ran cold. The monitors displayed scenes of unspeakable horror, humans and other species strapped to tables, being subjected to grotesque experiments. "They're not just building weapons," Alexander growled, his fists clenched in rage. "They're trying to enhance themselves, using us as lab rats." He turned to Novak. "Set this place to blow. We're ending this nightmare now." As the reactor core began to overload and the facility crumbled around them, Alexander led his team towards Hydras's chambers. They burst through the doors to find the Rizian leader waiting, surrounded by his personal guard. "So," Hydras hissed, his voice dripping with contempt, "the last of the humans come to die." Alexander raised his weapon. "The only one dying today is you." The room erupted into chaos. Alexander's team fought with desperate fury, their human unpredictability proving more than a match for the Rizians' advanced weaponry. Alexander found himself face to face with Hydras, the being responsible for Earth's destruction. They clashed in a brutal hand-to-hand struggle, neither willing to give an inch. Despite Hydras's augmented strength, Alexander's centuries of pent-up rage gave him the edge. With a final, devastating blow, he sent the Rizian leader crashing to the ground. As Hydras lay broken at his feet, Alexander leaned in close. "This is for Earth," he snarled, ending the tyrant's life with a single shot. With the facility about to explode, Alexander and his team raced back to their shuttles. They barely cleared the atmosphere before a massive explosion rocked the planet's surface, the research facility vanishing in a fireball visible from space. As news of Hydras's death spread across the galaxy, Alexander watched from the bridge of the Retribution as reports flooded in. Everywhere, oppressed species were rising up against their Rizian overlords. "We've given them hope," Hawkins said, standing at his side. Alexander nodded, his face set with unyielding commitment. "And now the real work begins." Alexander stood on the bridge of the Retribution, his eyes fixed on the holographic display of Rizian-controlled space. The stolen data from their previous missions scrolled across nearby screens, fueling plans for their next strike. "Sir, we've received confirmation from our allies," Sergeant Hawkins reported. "The Krell and Zorn resistance cells are ready to move on your command." Alexander nodded. "Good. We hit them hard and fast. Multiple targets, simultaneous strikes. The Rizians won't know what hit them." Over the next weeks, the human resistance and their alien allies launched a relentless campaign across Rizian territory. Supply depots exploded into flames. Communication relays went dark. Rizian patrols vanished without a trace. But Alexander knew these were just the opening moves. The real test would come at Tarsus 4. The Retribution dropped out of FTL on the edge of the Tarsus system. Alexander stood in the troop bay, surrounded by a motley crew of human soldiers and alien warriors. The air crackled with nervous energy. "This won't be easy," Alexander said, his voice cutting through the tension. "But remember what we're fighting for. Every Rizian ship we destroy here is one less that can threaten our homes, our families." The dropships screamed towards the surface of Tarsus 4. Anti-aircraft fire lit up the night sky, but the pilots threaded their way through with preternatural skill. As soon as they touched down, Alexander was moving. "Go, go, go!" he shouted, leading the charge out of the dropship. The Rizian defenses opened up, filling the air with plasma bolts. Alexander dove for cover behind a twisted piece of metal, the heat of near misses singeing his armor. He popped up, squeezing off precise bursts from his rifle. Rizian soldiers fell, their cries lost in the din of battle. As the main force engaged the Rizian defenders, Alexander signaled to his infiltration team. They split off, using the chaos of the battle as cover to approach the shipyard's perimeter. They reached a maintenance hatch, and Novak got to work. His fingers flew over his hacking device, and seconds later, the hatch slid open with a hiss. Inside, they encountered scattered resistance. Alexander moved with fluid grace, his enhanced reflexes allowing him to take down Rizian guards before they could even raise their weapons. They fought their way to the control center. Alexander planted breaching charges on the door, then signaled his team to take cover. The explosion rocked the facility, and they stormed in through the smoke and debris. "Novak, get to work on those defenses," Alexander ordered as they secured the room. "Hawkins, cover that door." Alarms blared as Novak's virus tore through the shipyard's systems. Outside, the sounds of battle intensified as the rebel fleet began their bombardment. "Sir, I've got the data," Novak called out. "But shit, they've initiated some kind of self-destruct sequence." Alexander's mind raced. They couldn't lose this facility, but the lives of his soldiers had to come first. "How long?" 10 minutes, maybe less." Alexander made the call. "All forces, this is Morales. Fall back to the extraction point immediately. We're aborting the mission." As they ran for the exit, the facility began to shake. Explosions rocked the structure, and chunks of debris rained down around them. They barely made it to the dropships before the entire shipyard went up in a massive fireball. Back on the Retribution, Alexander stared at the smoldering ruins on the planet below. A victory, but at a cost. "What now, sir?" Hawkins asked. "We analyze the data we stole," Alexander replied grimly. "And we prepare for their response. This isn't over, not by a long shot." Even as he spoke, events were unfolding across Rizian space. In the wake of Hydras's death, the Rizian High Command was in chaos. Factions formed and clashed, each vying for control. In the end, it was General Argoth who seized power. His voice boomed across Rizian communication channels. "The human vermin and their allies will be crushed. We will show them the true might of the Rizian Empire." Argoth wasted no time. A massive Rizian fleet appeared in orbit around Viridian 3, a vital rebel mining colony. The rebel defenders fought bravely, but they were hopelessly outgunned. Just as all seemed lost, the Retribution and its battle group dropped out of FTL. Alexander's voice crackled over the comms. "All ships, engage the enemy. We're not losing this system." The space above Viridian 3 erupted into chaos. Rebel ships darted between the massive Rizian dreadnoughts, hammering them with torpedo strikes. But the Rizians gave as good as they got, their superior firepower threatening to overwhelm the defenders. Alexander knew they needed a decisive strike. His eyes locked onto the largest Rizian ship, the Indomitable, Argoth's flagship. "Hawkins, Novak with me," he ordered. "We're boarding that dreadnought." Their assault shuttle weaved through the debris-filled battlefield, latching onto the Indomitable's hull. They cut their way inside and immediately encountered fierce resistance. The corridors of the Rizian ship became a bloodbath. Alexander and his team fought with desperate intensity, knowing the fate of the battle, perhaps the entire war, hung in the balance. They finally fought their way to the bridge. The doors slid open, revealing General Argoth himself, surrounded by his elite guard. For a moment, everything else faded away. Alexander locked eyes with the Rizian leader, a being responsible for countless atrocities. Argoth sneered. "So, the human comes to die." Alexander raised his weapon. "Not today." They charged at each other, and the battle for the fate of humanity and all alien species began in earnest. Alexander stood over Argoth's lifeless body, his chest heaving from exertion. The bridge of the Indomitable shuddered violently, consoles sparking and alarms blaring. "Sir, we've got a problem," Novak shouted, his fingers flying over a damaged control panel. "The ship's core is destabilizing. We're on a collision course with the nearest star." Alexander's mind raced. He couldn't let this opportunity slip away. Secure the bridge. We're taking control of this ship. His team sprang into action, subduing the remaining Rizian crew members. Outside the viewports, rebel ships engaged the confused Rizian fleet, providing crucial cover. "Hawkins, get me shipwide communications," Alexander ordered. She nodded, patching him through. Alexander's voice echoed throughout the massive vessel. "Attention, all hands. This is Alexander Morales of the Human Resistance. Your leadership has fallen. Stand down, and you will not be harmed." Pockets of resistance crumbled as the news spread. Alexander turned to Novak. "How long can you keep us stable?" 10 minutes, maybe less," Novak replied, sweat beading on his forehead. "Make it count," Alexander said. He activated the ship's powerful long-range transmitter, broadcasting across the galaxy. "To all beings suffering under Rizian oppression," he began, his voice firm and clear. "The tide has turned. We have struck a decisive blow against our oppressors." He transmitted data stolen from the Indomitables' computers, footage of brutal experiments, plans for genocide, records of countless atrocities. "The Rizians are not the benevolent guardians they claim to be," Alexander continued. "They are tyrants, and their time has come to an end. Stand with us. Fight with us. Together, we can forge a free galaxy." As he spoke, reports flooded in. Uprisings on a dozen worlds. Rizian fleets in disarray. The Galactic Council, already weakened, found its authority crumbling. A violent tremor rocked the ship. "We're out of time," Novak shouted. "All hands, abandon ship," Alexander ordered. They raced to the shuttle bay, boarding the last remaining craft as the Indomitable's hull began to buckle. The shuttle barely cleared the launch bay when the massive dreadnought plunged into the star's corona. The explosion lit up the system, a brilliant flash visible across light years. In the days that followed, Alexander coordinated a relentless campaign. Rebel cells activated on hundreds of worlds. The Rizian military, cut off from central command, fractured into competing factions. On the Retribution, Novak led a team poring over the stolen Rizian data. "Sir, you need to see this," he said, gesturing Alexander over to a holo display. "We've cracked their encryption. The advancements here, it's incredible." Alexander studied the schematics, a plan forming in his mind. "How quickly can we implement these?" "We've already begun fabrication," Novak replied. "The new shield generators will be online within days. Weapons upgrades will follow." Armed with this newfound edge, Alexander unleashed a series of devastating raids. On Centauri Prime, a rebel strike team led by Hawkins infiltrated a Rizian shipyard. They slipped past patrols, planted charges on key systems, and vanished into the night. The explosions crippled Rizian production for an entire sector. Alexander himself led an assault on a fortified Rizian supply depot in the Orion Nebula. Their upgraded shields shrugged off Rizian fire as they breached the perimeter. Inside, they secured stockpiles of vital resources and intelligence. With each victory, more worlds threw off the shackles of Rizian control. But Alexander knew the fight was not nearly finished. He stood before a holomap, plotting the next phase of the campaign. The Rizian homeworld glowed ominously at the center of their shrinking empire. "It's time," Alexander said, his eyes fixed on the final objective. "We end this, for Earth, for every world they've terrorized. We bring the fight to them." The assembled alien leaders and human officers nodded grimly. The greatest battle in galactic history loomed before them, with the fate of countless species hanging in the balance. Alexander stood on the bridge of the Retribution, surrounded by a vast armada of human and alien ships. The combined fleet stretched as far as the eye could see, a testament to the alliances forged through blood and sacrifice. "All ships prepare for FTL jump," Alexander ordered. "We end this war today." The fleet surged forward, reality warping around them as they plunged towards Rizia Prime. They emerged from hyperspace to face a wall of Rizian warships. "Weapons free," Alexander shouted. "Engage at will." Space lit up with energy beams and missile trails. The Retribution shuddered as it took hits, but its upgraded shields held firm. Alexander watched the tactical display, directing the flow of battle. "Sir, we've opened a gap in their defenses," Hawkins reported. Alexander nodded. "That's our window. Prepare the strike team." He led his elite squad to the hangar bay, where a stealth dropship waited. As they rocketed towards the planet's surface, the space battle raged around them. A Rizian cruiser exploded nearby, bathing them in eerie light. The dropship bucked violently as it hit the atmosphere. Anti-aircraft fire filled the sky, but the pilot's skill saw them through. They touched down hard in a war-torn city square. "Move!" Alexander shouted, leading the charge out of the dropship. Rizian soldiers swarmed towards them. Alexander's team responded with precise fire, cutting down the first wave. They pushed forward, securing building after building. "Novak, get that uplink established," Alexander ordered as they fortified their position. Novak's fingers flew over his portable terminal. "We're live, sir. Reinforcements inbound." More dropships screamed overhead, disgorging fresh troops into the growing landing zone. Alexander led from the front as they battled through the streets of the Rizian capital. They fought past automated defense turrets and fanatical Rizian warriors. Alexander's enhanced reflexes allowed him to dodge plasma bolts by mere inches, returning fire with deadly accuracy. "Sir, we've taken the power distribution hub," Sergeant Chen's voice crackled over the comm. "Good work," Alexander replied. "Push on to the next objective." Hour by hour, they clawed their way across the city. Alexander's forces seized vital installations, communications arrays, weapons depots, shield generators. The Rizian defenders grew more desperate with each loss. A group of Rizian shock troops ambushed them at an intersection. Alexander dove for cover as energy bolts scorched the air around him. He popped up, squeezing off short bursts that dropped two enemies. "Hawkins, left flank!" he shouted. She responded instantly, her heavy weapon blazing. The remaining Rizians fell back, allowing Alexander's team to advance. They pushed the enemy back, block by block, until they reached the outskirts of the central citadel. Its imposing walls loomed before them, dripping with weapon emplacements. Alexander activated his comm. "All units converge on the citadel. This is their last stand." A fleet of combat mechs stomped forward, their massive guns opening up on the citadel's outer defenses. Alien warriors from a dozen species charged alongside human soldiers. The citadel's guns roared to life. Explosions rocked the ground as casualties mounted on both sides. Alexander led a team towards a breach in the outer wall, plasma bolts sizzling past his head. They fought through winding corridors and vast chambers, each room a potential death trap. Alexander's enhanced senses strained to their limit as he reacted to threats from all sides. A Rizian defender lunged at him with an energy blade. Alexander barely managed to deflect the blow, the searing heat inches from his face. He countered with a vicious strike that sent the alien crumpling to the floor. "Push forward!" he shouted, leading the charge deeper into the citadel. They battled their way to the central chamber, where the remaining Rizian High Command had barricaded themselves. Alexander's forces breached the final set of blast doors to find themselves face-to-face with the alien leaders. "Surrender now," Alexander said, his voice carrying across the room. "End this madness before more blood is shed." The Rizian Supreme Commander snarled, "We will never yield to lesser beings." In a flash, the Rizians drew hidden weapons. Alexander's enhanced reflexes saved him as he dove for cover. His team responded with overwhelming force, their weapons filling the air with deadly fire. When the dust settled, Alexander stood over the fallen Rizian leaders. Outside, the sounds of battle began to fade as news of the High Command's defeat spread. Alexander keyed his comm. "All units, the citadel has fallen. Secure your sectors and prepare for further orders." He looked out over the ruined city, the enormity of their victory sinking in. The war that had consumed the galaxy was finally over, but the real work of rebuilding was just beginning. The acrid smell of burnt circuitry filled Alexander's nostrils as he stood on the bridge of the Retribution. Screens flickered with reports from across the galaxy, detailing the fall of the Rizian capital. A chorus of cheers erupted from the crew, but Alexander's face remained grim. Sir, we're detecting multiple Rizian ships breaking formation, a young officer called out. They're scattering to the outer systems. Alexander's eyes narrowed. They're not giving up that easily. Hawkins, assemble your team. We've got fugitives to hunt. Hours later, Sergeant Hawkins crouched behind a rocky outcropping on Caldor's 7th, her breath misting in the thin atmosphere. The barren landscape stretched out before her, broken only by the squat shape of a Rizian outpost. 3 hostiles moving to the bunker, her spotter whispered. Hawkins nodded, signaling her squad to advance. They moved swiftly across the open ground, weapons at the ready. As they neared the outpost, a sentry spotted them. "Contact!" Hawkins shouted as plasma bolts sizzled past her head. The air filled with weapons fire. Hawkins ducked and rolled, coming up firing. Her shots found their mark, dropping the sentry. Her team pushed forward, forcing the Rizians back. "They're falling back to the bunker," Corporal Jang called out. Hawkins gritted her teeth. "Don't let them regroup. Move." They stormed the bunker entrance, but the heavy doors slammed shut just as they reached it. Hawkins pounded on the metal. "Surrender now and you'll be treated fairly," she shouted. A muffled voice responded from inside. "We choose death over dishonor." Hawkins' eyes widened as she heard a distinct beeping sound. "Fall back!" she screamed. The explosion rocked the ground, sending Hawkins and her team sprawling. As the dust settled, they saw that the bunker entrance was completely sealed by rubble. "Status report," Hawkins coughed, struggling to her feet. "Minor injuries, Sarge," Zhang replied. "But we're cut off from the Rizians." Hawkins activated her comm. "Command, this is Hawkins. We've got a situation." On the Retribution, Alexander listened to Hawkins' report with growing concern. As he processed the information, another officer approached. "Sir, we've intercepted Rizian communications. They're talking about bioweapons." Alexander's blood ran cold. He turned to his XO. "Prep a rapid response team. We're going to Caldor 7th. The next hours passed in a blur of frantic activity. Alexander's team touched down on Caldor 7, bringing heavy excavation equipment. They worked tirelessly, cutting through rock and metal to reach the trapped soldiers and Rizian commanders. As the last barrier fell away, Alexander stepped into the bunker. The air was thick and stale. Hawkins and her team looked exhausted, but relieved. The Rizian commanders huddled in a corner, defiant even in defeat. Alexander approached them, his face a mask of cold fury. "You're going to tell me everything about these bioweapons, now." One Rizian spat at Alexander's feet. "We'll tell you nothing, human." Alexander leaned in close, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "You misunderstand. This isn't a request." What followed was not something Alexander would later recall with pride, but it got results. The Rizians broke, revealing their horrifying plan to unleash a mutagenic virus on populated worlds. "Novak!" Alexander barked into his comm. "I need everything we have on Rizian refinery operations near black holes. We've got a lead." Alexander assembled a strike team, selecting the best from those available. They boarded a stealth ship, its hull specially designed to resist the gravitational forces near a black hole. As they approached the abandoned refinery, Alexander briefed his team. "We go in fast and quiet. Novak's team will handle the extraction. Our job is to secure those bioweapons at all costs." They docked with the refinery, immediately encountering resistance from automated defense systems. Alexander led the charge, his enhanced reflexes allowing him to dodge energy beams by mere centimeters. They fought their way through twisting corridors, the creaking of the station's superstructure a constant reminder of the black hole's pull. Finally, they reached the central chamber where the bioweapons were stored. As Alexander's team secured the payload, warning klaxons began to blare. A computerized voice announced, "Antimatter containment failure imminent. Evacuate immediately." "Novak, we need that extraction now," Alexander shouted into his comm. "Almost there," Novak's voice crackled back. "Stand by for wormhole activation." The chamber began to shake violently. Alexander and his team huddled around the bioweapon canisters, hearts pounding. Just as the station began to break apart, a shimmering portal opened beneath their feet. They fell through, tumbling onto the deck of the Retribution. Behind them, the wormhole winked out of existence. On the screen, they watched as the refinery collapsed in on itself, pulled into the black hole's maw. Alexander stood, his legs shaky but his voice firm. "Secure those canisters. I want them under guard at all times." He turned to Novak, who looked pale but proud. "Good work, all of you. We just saved countless lives today." As the adrenaline faded, Alexander allowed himself a small smile. They had stopped the Rizians' final, desperate plot. The war was truly over. But as he looked at the bioweapon canisters, he knew that the work of rebuilding a fractured galaxy was just beginning. Alexander stood on the bridge of the Retribution, his eyes scanning the intel reports flooding the screens. The bioweapon crisis was over, but a new threat loomed. He turned to his officers, his voice steady. "We've got movement in the Kryler system. Admiral Trevak is gathering what's left of the Rizian fleet." Hawkins leaned in, studying the tactical display. "Sir, those numbers, they're preparing for a major offensive." Alexander nodded. "Trevak won't go down without a fight. We end this now." The Retribution led a massive Allied fleet into the Krylor system. As they dropped out of hyperspace, the vastness of space erupted into chaos. Rizian warships filled the void, their weapons already blazing. "All ships engage!" Alexander ordered. The comm channels exploded with chatter as the battle began. Energy beams crisscrossed the darkness. Explosions bloomed silently in the vacuum. Alexander watched as Allied cruisers traded fire with Rizian destroyers. "Sir, we've located the Vengeance," an officer called out. Alexander's eyes narrowed as he spotted Trevak's flagship. "That's our target. Prepare the strike team." Minutes later, Alexander led his elite squad through the cramped confines of a stealth shuttle. The craft weaved through the debris-filled battlefield, dodging stray fire as it approached the Vengeance. They latched onto the Rizian dreadnought's hull. Alexander's team cut through the airlock, bursting into the ship's corridors. Alarms blared as they fought their way deeper into the vessel. Rizian defenders swarmed them. Alexander's enhanced reflexes allowed him to duck under a plasma bolt, returning fire in one fluid motion. His team moved with practiced precision, covering each other as they advanced. They reached the bridge, blasting through the final set of blast doors. Trevak's bodyguards rushed to meet them. Alexander ducked under a vicious swing, countering with a bone-crushing strike to his attacker's midsection. As the last guard fell, Alexander came face to face with Admiral Trevak. The Rizian's eyes burned with hatred. "You've destroyed everything we've built," Trevak snarled. "I'll see your precious alliance burn for this." Trevak lunged, a hidden blade flashing in his hand. Alexander twisted away, the edge slicing through his uniform. They clashed across the bridge, a deadly dance of strikes and counters. The ship rocked violently as Allied fire pounded the Vengeance. Sparks showered from damaged consoles. Trevak stumbled, and Alexander pressed his advantage. A savage kick sent Trevak sprawling. The Rizian admiral scrambled to a nearby console, his fingers flying over the controls. "If I fall, I'm taking you all with me," Trevak shouted. Warning klaxons screamed to life. Alexander realized with horror that Trevak was overloading the ship's reactor. He dove for the console, wrestling with Trevak. Alexander's augmented strength gave him the edge, and he managed to disrupt the overload sequence. But the reactor remained dangerously unstable. "Alexander, we need to evacuate now." Hawkins' voice crackled over the comm. "The Retribution is moving into position for extraction." Alexander glanced at Trevak, who glared back with defiance. "Negative, I'm finishing this." He grabbed Trevak, dragging the struggling Rizian towards the reactor chamber. They stumbled through twisting corridors as the ship shuddered around them. They reached the pulsing heart of the Vengeance. The reactor core glowed an ominous red, tendrils of energy arcing outwards. Trevak broke free, snatching up a length of broken piping. "You'll die here, human!" The two warriors circled each other. Alexander dodged Trevak's wild swing, retaliating with a flurry of strikes that drove the Rizian back. Trevak fought with the desperation of a cornered animal, but Alexander's superior training showed. A thunderous explosion rocked the chamber. Alexander saw his opening. He surged forward, disarming Trevak with a brutal twist. The Rizian admiral crumpled to the deck, defeated at last. Alexander stood over his fallen foe, chest heaving. The reactor's warning sirens reached a fever pitch. He knew there were only seconds left. With a final glance at Trevak's broken form, Alexander sprinted to the chamber's control panel. His fingers danced across the keys, initiating the ship's separation protocols. The deck lurched beneath him as the reactor chamber detached from the rest of the Vengeance. Through the viewport, Alexander watched as the remainder of the ship vanished in a blinding flash. He sank to his knees, exhaustion overwhelming him. The reactor chamber tumbled into the void, carrying Alexander, Trevak's body, and the last embers of the Rizian resistance into the abyss. The reactor chamber drifted silently through the void, carrying Alexander Morales into the annals of history. Aboard the Retribution, the crew stood at attention, their faces etched with grief and respect. Sergeant Hawkins stepped forward, her voice carrying across the hushed crowd. "We're here to honor a man who gave everything for our cause. Alexander Morales wasn't just our leader. He was the embodiment of humanity's strength and resilience." Hawkins paused, her eyes scanning the assembled faces. "I remember the first time I saw him in action. We were pinned down on Caldor 7, and he charged straight into enemy fire to drag a wounded soldier to safety. That's who Alexander was, selfless, brave, and always putting others first." Private Jang nodded, his voice thick with emotion. "He never asked us to do anything he wouldn't do himself. When we stormed that Rizian outpost, he was right there in the thick of it, leading the charge." As the memorial continued, a figure in the back of the room caught Hawkins's attention. Private Novak stood quietly, his eyes fixed on a datapad in his hands. As the ceremony concluded, Novak approached Hawkins, his face alight with excitement. "Sergeant, I need to show you something," Novak said, his words tumbling out in a rush. "It's a project I've been working on, inspired by some of Alexander's ideas." Hawkins followed Novak to a secure lab deep within the Retribution. The room hummed with energy, banks of computers lining the walls. In the center stood a pulsing orb of light, contained within a transparent chamber. "This is Project Prometheus," Novak explained, his hands flying over a control panel. "We've managed to combine human ingenuity with reverse-engineered Rizian tech. The result is a propulsion system that can traverse intergalactic distances in an instant." Hawkins leaned in, her eyes widening as she processed the implications. "You're saying we can reach any point in the galaxy? Instantly?" Novak nodded, his face beaming with pride. "Exactly. We can seek out and liberate subjugated worlds across the cosmos. It's everything Alexander fought for, a chance to spread freedom throughout the galaxy." As news of Project Prometheus spread, a renewed sense of purpose filled the Alliance. Exploration and colonization fleets were hastily constructed, eager to push beyond known frontiers. The seeds of humanity's resurgence were being sown across the stars. However, the celebration was short-lived. Intelligence reports soon identified a heavily fortified Rizian stronghold in the Cygnus Rift. At its helm stood Grand Admiral Vaskal, the highest-ranking Rizian fugitive still at large. Hawkins pored over the sensor data, her brow furrowed in concentration. "They've amassed a sizable fleet and weapons stockpile. Vaskal's planning something big." She turned to her assembled team, her voice filled with steel. "We end this now. I'm leading a strike force into the Cygnus Rift. We'll use Project Prometheus to bypass their defenses and hit them where they least expect it." Hawkins handpicked her team, a mix of lethal human ghost operatives and seasoned alien commandos. As they boarded their stealth ship, she addressed them one final time. "This is for Alexander and for every soul who suffered under Rizian oppression. We finish this today." The ship's engines flared to life, powered by Project Prometheus. In a heartbeat, they traversed the vast distances of space, emerging directly within the asteroid field concealing Vasquil's base. Alarms blared as Hawkins' team burst from their ship, weapons blazing. They cut through the surprised Rizian defenders without effort, quickly establishing a foothold on the station. Hawkins barked orders into her comm. Greycath, take your team and secure the hangar. Demo squad, rig those key structures. I'm pushing for the command center. She led her strike team through twisting corridors, engaging in fierce firefights with Vasquil's elite guard. Plasma bolts sizzled past her head as she dove for cover, returning fire with deadly accuracy. Finally, they breached the command bunker. Hawkins found herself face-to-face with Grand Admiral Vasquil, the Rizian's eyes burning with hatred. You're too late, human, Vasquil snarled, gesturing to a holographic display. In mere hours, our revenge will be complete. Hawkins's blood ran cold as she deciphered the plans on the screen. An unstable artificial wormhole, capable of triggering an apocalyptic chain reaction. Vasquil's final act of vengeance would obliterate all matter in this region of the galaxy. Team, fan out, Hawkins ordered. Find that wormhole generator core. We've got to shut it down. A brutal firefight erupted as they raced against time. Hawkins' team pushed forward, inch by bloody inch, towards the heart of the station. As they neared the core, Hawkins shouted into her comm. Novak, we need you. Can you override their systems remotely? Back on the Retribution, Novak's fingers flew across his keyboard. I'm in their network, but I need more time. The seconds ticked by agonizingly slow as Hawkins and her team held off waves of Rizian defenders. Just as it seemed all hope was lost, Novak's voice crackled through the comm. I've got it! Shutting down the core now! The station rumbled as the wormhole generator powered down. In the ensuing chaos, Hawkins spotted Vasquil making a break for a heavily armored shuttle. Oh no you don't, Hawkins growled, sprinting after the Rizian admiral. She caught up to Vasquil just as he reached the shuttle's airlock. They grappled fiercely, neither willing to give an inch. As they fought, Hawkins keyed her comm one last time. Retribution, target these coordinates. Fire everything you've got. Vasquil's eyes widened in horror as he realized Hawkins' plan. With a final burst of strength, Hawkins shoved the Rizian admiral into the shuttle and sealed the airlock. She dove for cover as the station shook violently. Through a viewport, she watched as precisely targeted orbital bombardment obliterated Vasquil's shuttle, ensuring the last of the Rizian High Command was finally eradicated. As the dust settled, Hawkins stumbled back to her team. They looked battered but triumphant. One of the younger soldiers approached her, his voice filled with awe. Is it really over, Sergeant? Hawkins nodded, a small smile playing at the corners of her mouth. The Rizian Empire is finished. Now the real work begins. As they made their way back to their ship, Hawkins's thoughts turned to the future. With the chains of oppression broken, humanity stood poised to claim its rightful place among the stars. The galaxy lay open before them, a canvas of infinite possibilities. The victory over the Rizian Empire echoed across the stars, but the cost took a toll on those who survived. Sergeant Hawkins stood on the bridge of the Retribution, watching as the last Rizian warship surrendered. The view screen flickered, showing scenes of celebration from liberated worlds. We did it, sir, Private Zhang said, his voice barely above a whisper. But without Alexander... Hawkins nodded, her eyes fixed on the distant stars. His sacrifice won't be forgotten. Now we build the future he fought for. Months passed as the Alliance consolidated its newfound freedom. Hawkins found herself on the former Rizian capital world, overseeing its transformation. She walked through the skeletal framework of what would become New Avalon's Central Plaza, construction drones buzzing overhead. Progress report, she barked at a nearby technician. The young woman snapped to attention. Atmospheric processors are at 78% efficiency, ma'am. We've begun seeding the first agricultural zones. Hawkins nodded, surveying the barren landscape slowly giving way to patches of green. Human and alien laborers worked side by side, turning the war-torn world into a symbol of hope. As New Avalon took shape, Hawkins received an urgent message from Novak. She rushed to the newly constructed spaceport, boarding a shuttle bound for deep space. The Alliance Nexus loomed before her, a massive structure of gleaming metal and pulsing energy fields. Novak greeted her as she docked, practically bouncing with excitement. "It's ready," Novak beamed, leading Hawkins through bustling corridors. A hub for all species to come together, share knowledge, and forge a brighter future. They entered the Nexus's grand atrium, a cavernous space filled with representatives from dozens of worlds. Hawkins took her place at the podium, facing the assembled crowd. "We stand here today," she began, her voice carrying across the chamber, "not just as victors, but as architects of a new era. Alexander Morales gave his life so that we might live free. We honor him and all those who fell by building a society worthy of their sacrifice." As Hawkins spoke, unease rippled through the crowd. A delegation of Zekthari, their scales glinting under the atrium's lights, muttered among themselves. In the shadows, a group of battle-scarred Krovak warriors clenched their fists. Months passed, and tensions simmered beneath the surface of the fledgling Commonwealth. Hawkins found herself mediating disputes between former enemies, struggling to maintain the fragile peace. Meanwhile, Novak led expeditions to the Galactic fringe, probing the mysteries of long-dead civilizations. She stood in the ruins of an ancient city, holographic displays flickering around her. "These readings don't make sense," she muttered, manipulating the data. "It's as if their entire civilization just vanished." A junior scientist approached, his face pale. "Dr. Novak, you need to see this." They rushed to a makeshift command center, where a massive display showed a roiling vortex of energy at the edge of known space. Novak's eyes widened as she processed the implications. "No," she whispered, "it can't be." Back on New Avalon, Hawkins received Novak's urgent transmission. She assembled the Commonwealth's leadership, tension thick in the air as Novak explained the looming threat. "An entropy wave," Novak said, her voice grim. "It's consumed countless galaxies and now it's headed straight for us." The room erupted into chaos. Voices shouted over each other, demanding solutions, assigning blame. Hawkins slammed her fist on the table, silencing the din. "Enough!" she roared. "We didn't come this far to tear ourselves apart now. Novak, what are our options?" Novak outlined two possibilities, an artificial singularity or a massive exodus. The leaders argued late into the night, weighing impossible choices. In the end, Hawkins made the call. "We build the Ark," she said, her voice heavy with the weight of countless lives. "We save what we can and carry our civilization to the stars." Construction began immediately. The Commonwealth poured its resources into Project Diaspora, a vessel unlike anything ever built. Hawkins oversaw the evacuation efforts, watching as worlds were stripped bare to fuel humanity's last hope. As the entropy wave approached, consuming all in its path, the last transports docked with the massive Ark. Hawkins stood on the bridge, surrounded by the remnants of a galaxy's worth of life and culture. She keyed the comms, broadcasting one final message to the doomed worlds they left behind. "To any survivors we may one day encounter among the stars, know that the light of humanity's indomitable spirit still burns brightly as we go forward into the unknown to begin anew. Though worlds and empires may crumble, the flame of defiance against the darkness can never be extinguished. We will endure." With a silent command, the Ark's engines flared to life. In a blinding flash of light, they slipped into the cosmic void, leaving behind the ashes of their former home. Hawkins watched the starfield shift around them, venturing into the unknown. The journey ahead was long and fraught with danger, but the spark of hope burned bright. Humanity had survived, and would forge a new destiny among the outer realms.
You have reached the end of the story. If you enjoyed this story and want to support us, please leave a like and subscribe to our channel, and for every comment that says 88, I will heart every single one of them. Thank you for your time.